Hello. So today we will be discussing fragments. Fragments are very important in Android programming and they were introduced from Android Honeycomb. But later on they were extended to support even Android devices which were released earlier. So what does a fragment do? So fragment allow us to create dynamic and multi-pane user interface on Android. What does it mean? Let us see a image. Now you see. So when we started having tablets which had a much larger screen, there was a need to have different types of displays for tablets or anything which has a larger screen and on phones which usually have a smaller screens. The same logic applies even for phones with larger screens and the phones with a smaller screen. So suppose you have a very simple application which displays your name as a list, and when you click on any of the name, then it displays basic information. Let us say your photograph, your name, your roll number, your program that you are studying, etc., etc. So there is a list of names and for each name there is a detailed information. Now if I have to develop this Android application just on a phone, a good approach would be that initially my phone screen displays a list, and if I click on a list, I move to another screen where I see the details. Then I can click on the back to the list, click on another name and see the details of another name, and so on. This is a natural interface for a phone. However, suppose we have a tablet. Now we can have the same interface that we have on the phone on the tablet as well, but on tablet a more natural interface would be something like this, where let's say either the left or the right side displays the list, and then there is another portion which can be used to display the details at the same time when the list is being displayed. So when the user clicks on any of the name on the list, they can see the display right there. So this looks like a more natural interface for the tablet. Now whatever you have learned so far, if you try to emulate that in presenting a display like this, for phone it is straightforward. You can create activities and one activity takes you to another activity, and you can create on a list item here and that shows you another screen. You can come back, press on another list item, and then you can see the another screen. However, if you want to move this code to the tablet and want to show something like this is not possible, because the activity life cycle and the way activity has been implemented in Android does not allow you this functionality that you can display two activities where you can move back and forth between the activity and interact with the same part. So here what you kind of need is something like that there is a bigger activity and that it involves maybe two or more sub activities, but this is not allowed in the activity. So Android makes it available as fragment and not activities. So let's come back. So fragments are which allow us to create dynamic and multi-pane user interface just like the one we discussed. So the fragment lets us create modules that encapsulate UI components and activity behavior, and then it allows us to swap in or out the modules based on our need. And different fragments can be configured in different combinations with other fragments inside a single activity, which then allows modifying layout for different screen sizes. Now let's come back to our picture again. So the way I will implement it is that I will have only one activity, and my one activity will have, let us say my list is of 10 names. So my one activity will have 11 fragments. The one fragment will display the list and the other 10 fragments correspond to the details of the individual items of the list. Now, when I am developing for the mobile, at that time my activity will only invoke one fragment and then another fragment. But when I am on a tablet, my activity will have two fragments at any given time. So while we cannot show two activities as part of one activity, we can show two or more fragments as part of one single activity. So in a way, your fragment is actually like a sub-activity that is running inside an activity. So now you can see that this gives us a lot of freedom when we want to develop. Suppose our interface is different and we want to display small thumbnails of all the list items here. So that is not very difficult. We can display so many fragments inside the same activity. Or we want to maybe just display two or four or six or any combination. The fragments and the activity together provides us this functionality. So always think of fragment like a sub-activity, and that multiple fragments can be used inside an activity in different type of configuration as you need them. So let's come back to the details again. So treat fragment like a sub-activity running inside an activity. Each fragment, just like an activity, also has its own life cycle. So in the previous classes, we have read about activity life cycles. So activity life cycles go something like on create, start, create, resume, pause, stop, destroy. Similarly, the fragment also has its own life cycle. Now, fragment's life cycle, because fragment is running inside an activity, fragment's life cycle is directly affected by the life cycle of the host activity. So, if you pause the activity, fragments inside it will also be paused. If you destroy the activity, fragments inside it will also be destroyed. So where do we manipulate fragments? So we manipulate fragments when the activity is in the resumed state, or what we call in the running state as well. So when activity is after on resume, if you remember from the activity life cycle, that is activity is running, at that time we can manipulate the fragments, because that is when we have the full freedom. At that time we can add fragments dynamically, we can remove fragments dynamically, we can replace fragments dynamically, we can choose different combinations of fragments. So fragments along with activity allows us the flexibility that we want to have when we are dealing with devices which have different disk sizes, or when we want to develop UIs which are multi-pane and interactive. The activity which is hosting these fragments also manages a back stack to manage fragment transactions. So the back stack is maintained by an activity. So suppose you added fragment 1, fragment 2, fragment 3. Now you are pressing back button. The back stack will allow you to go back to the fragment that you did. We call it a fragment transactions, and the back stack entry is a record of the fragment transaction. So when you add a fragment, that's a fragment transaction. When you remove a fragment, that's a fragment transaction. And your backstack entries are recording these transactions. So using the backstack, we can allow the users to reverse to a fragment transaction by pressing the back button. Now, when we define activity, we define usually a layout. And if you remember from our previous lectures, a layout is a combination of view groups and view objects. So when we add a fragment as part of our activity layout, the fragment must live somewhere, and it lives in the view group inside the activities view hierarchy. Okay, so the fragment defines its own view layout and it receives its own input events. In fact, when you add a fragment, the layout of the fragment is inflated and sort of insert it into the view group of the activity. Now, the next part is more of a design consideration which you should keep in mind when you are writing an Android application. And it is that you should design your each fragment to be as modular as possible so that you can use it as a reusable activity component with different activities and without depending on something which binds a fragment to a particular activity. So try to make your fragment always as modular as you can. There should be like an individual independent component that you bring in together for one activity or for another activity without affecting the functionality of the program. So one important step is that you should not engage in direct manipulation of one fragment from another fragment. Now let's look again on the same example. Here you can see that our activity that we are developing will have a kind of view group for the phone, and this will only display the list, while for this the layout of the activity would be such that in that layout it is possible to insert two fragments. So for phone we will have to have a layout file which only inserts one fragment. For the tablet we will have to have a layout file which inserts two fragments. So that's how you insert a fragment into an activity to create the overall view. Now there are few more important things with fragments. The most important thing is that we develop fragment what we call using a support library provided by Android. So Android provides two implementation of fragments, one in the support library and one in the Android OS. And contrary to our intuition, we use the version which is provided in the support library. And there are two major reasons of doing this. The reason number one is that the support library allows compatibility with devices running system version as low as Android 1.6. The name of this library is v4 library, and if you develop your fragments with the v4 support library, which is recommended by Google and Android developer community, you can support devices which are running as low version as Android 1.6. That is very old Android devices as well. So how do you develop your fragments with support library? You will have to do some extra work, and let us see what you need to do. Let me open the Android Studio and show you how to add the correct support library. So this is our Android Studio. Let me go into the file. So go on the top left, click on the file. If you click on the file, you can come down and you will see a menu item called Project Structure. Click on Project Structure. The project structure will open a dialog box for you. In this dialog box, towards the end, there would be something called App under Modules. If you click on App, the dialog box will change into a tabbed dialog box. And if you read the tabs, it reads as Properties, Signing, Flavors, Build Types, and Dependencies. Currently, we are interested in the dependencies. So I will go into the dependencies and I will see that what dependencies are here. I can also remove a dependency or add a new dependency. Actually, for this purpose, I have already added the v4 library which I was asking you to add. So I was asking you to add the v4 library, and as you see, I have already added the v4 library. So let me first remove it and show you. So if you are starting a program from scratch, you will probably see a dependencies window like this. So click on the plus item, the green plus item, which is on the right side. If you hover your mouse, the item will say add. Click on this item. It will show you a smaller dialog box, library dependency, file dependency, module dependency. I will go into the library dependency. Now it will show me all the libraries that I can add into my program. In this, if you look at from the beginning, then the second item, which reads as support-v4 com.android.support support v4 24.2.0. That's the v4 library that we were talking about. I select it and I press OK. Now I can see that my dependency has been added. And that's all I have to do. If you look at this dependencies window, you will also see the other dependencies which are already there. So let me open it again under the project structure and the dependencies. So you will see that there is a dependency named here called appcompat-v7. If you remember the name appcompat, then you will see that for your activities the appcompat is necessary. Some of you have put a question that they are finding this error that appcompat library not found or something similar. This basically means that your dependencies has not been created properly. So you can repeat the same procedure for adding dependency for the appcompat library as well. Now, because I have added the support library, when I extend an activity for fragment, my import message is of support.v4.app.fragment activity. So please, after you have added the support library and before you start creating fragment, make sure that you are also importing the same correct support library for your program. Now let's go back to our presentation. So yes, we develop using the support library for two major reasons. One, that it provides backward compatibility with far lower version of Android, and number two, that support library gets updated far more often. So you will have more latest features in the support library. Now, how do we develop a fragment? We extend the class fragment, we set up a user interface layout, and we add a fragment to an activity. We will see all this in a program, but first we want to cover some basics of the fragment. Now, let me first increase it a little bit. What I am trying to show you is the fragment life cycle. So this is very similar to, I hope now all of you can see. Some of you have mentioned that you find difficulty in seeing the screen, so I have increased the size. So this is the fragment life cycle. It starts when fragment is added. Then it calls some methods, callback methods, just like the activity. The important method for us here is the onCreateView, and that's where we will do our action. Similarly, onAttach, onCreate, onCreateView, onActivity, onStart, onResume. Just like activity, fragment also gets active after the call to onResume. And then onPause, onStop, onDestroyView, onDestroy, onDetach. So these are the callback methods which are the part of the fragment lifecycle. Later on we will see that how these methods correspond with the methods of the activity lifecycle. Among these methods there are three methods which are important. One is onCreate, another is onCreateView, and the another is onPause. So the onCreate method is called when the system is trying to create the fragment. So you must initialize essential component of the fragment in the onCreate method. Then the second important method is the onCreate. This is called when it is time for the fragment to draw its user interface for the first time. And in order to draw a UI for your fragment, you must return a view from this method that is the root of the fragment or root of your fragment's layout. Later we will see through a program how do we do this. Please note that a fragment need not to always provide a UI. In that case, you can return none. The third important method is onPause. The system calls this method when the user is planning to leave. This is similar to what the onPause method of the activity is. And because the user may leave, you must commit any changes that should be persisted. So these are the three major methods. As usual, I have used following references. All of this information is available on the developer.android.com website and it has been taken from that. So if you have any doubt, you can go to the developer.android.com and read yourself. In the next video, we will cover more details about fragments, slightly seeing how the fragment is made use in an activity. And then in more other videos, we will run a program using fragments and see it in action. Thank you.